I used to sleep for 8 hours at night. Now, I can't remember the last time I did. Even with Thomas grown and gone, my body wakes itself at 5:30 a.m., as if there are still lunches to pack and permission slips to sign. Old habits, I suppose. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. I'm 53 years old now, though sometimes when I catch my reflection in the hallway mirror, I still expect to see that 24-year-old art school graduate with fire in her eyes. The one who spent nights in a cramped studio apartment, smelling of turpentine and possibility, creating installations that my professors said showed remarkable promise. That Eleanor believed she'd have gallery showings in New York someday. That Eleanor kept a folder of exhibition announcements with her name photoshopped onto them, a visualization technique she'd read about in a magazine. I still have those mock-ups in a box somewhere in the attic. I haven't looked at them in decades. I met David at a friend's housewarming party in the summer of 2000. He worked in finance, was tall with kind eyes, and laughed at my jokes about the terrible wine we were drinking. When he asked about my work, he actually listened instead of nodding politely until he could talk about himself. By our third date, I felt comfortable enough to show him my studio. He stayed for hours, asking questions about my process, genuinely interested in understanding why I chose certain materials or colors. "You're going to be famous someday," he said as we left. "I can see it." I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because he made it sound possible. We moved in together 6 months later. Got engaged after a year. And then, 2 months before our wedding, the 2 pink lines appeared on the pregnancy test. It wasn't planned, we'd been careful, but there it was. A life. Our life, growing inside me. David was thrilled. I was terrified. "This changes everything," I told him, sitting on the bathroom floor. "We'll figure it out," he promised, holding my hands. Plenty of artists have children. He was right, of course. But what he didn't understand was that I was just starting to gain traction. I'd had my first small showing at a local gallery, and a curator from Chicago had expressed interest in my work. The timing couldn't have been worse. Still, we got married as planned, my dress let out to accommodate my growing belly. And 5 months later, Thomas David Mitchell came screaming into the world at 3:17 in the morning, all red-faced and determined. The moment they placed him on my chest, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. Priorities rearranged themselves without my conscious input. The universe contracted to the size of this tiny, perfect person whose existence depended entirely on me. I told myself it would be temporary. Just a pause. 6 months, maybe a year, and then I'd get back to my art. David encouraged this plan, even converted the spare bedroom into a makeshift studio for me. But babies don't care about plans. Thomas had colic. He cried for hours every evening, no matter what we tried. I walked miles around our small apartment, bouncing him gently as he wailed. I sang until my voice gave out. I slept in broken 30-minute segments. By the time he finally outgrew it at 4 months, I was a shell of myself. That was when the gallery in Chicago called. They were planning a showcase of emerging artists for the fall. Was I interested? I looked at Thomas, finally sleeping peacefully in his crib. I thought about the half-finished pieces gathering dust in my studio. I tried to imagine completing them, creating new ones, traveling for the showing, all while caring for an infant. "I can't," I told the gallery owner. "Not right now." "We understand," she said kindly. "Maybe next time." There wasn't a next time. The gallery never called again. When Thomas turned 1, I took a part-time job teaching art at a community center. It wasn't what I'd dreamed of, but it kept me connected to that world, at least. David's career was taking off. He'd been promoted twice since Thomas was born, and his income meant we didn't strictly need my paycheck. But I needed to feel like I was still an artist, even if I wasn't creating much anymore. The years began to blur together, marked by Thomas's milestones rather than my own. His first steps. First words. First day of kindergarten. I documented it all meticulously, channeling my creative energy into birthday parties with handmade decorations and elaborate Halloween costumes. David and I settled into the rhythm of married life. He worked long hours, climbing the corporate ladder. I managed our home, raised our son, and taught my classes. We weren't unhappy, exactly, but there was a distance growing between us that neither of us acknowledged. "Do you ever miss your art?" he asked once, late at night as we lay in bed. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But Thomas is my masterpiece now." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't fully understand. How could he? His career had continued uninterrupted. He hadn't had to choose. By the time Thomas started middle school, I'd stopped calling myself an artist. I was a teacher, a mother, a wife. The dream of galleries and exhibitions had faded so gradually I barely noticed its absence, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Thomas showed early signs of his father's analytical mind. He excelled in math and science, bringing home perfect test scores that we proudly displayed on the refrigerator. But he struggled socially, finding it difficult to make friends. "The other kids think I'm weird," he confessed one afternoon, picking at his sandwich. "Being different isn't bad," I told him. "It means you're special." "I don't want to be special. I want to be normal." My heart broke for him. I recognized that feeling, the desire to fit in, to be accepted. I remembered how lonely art school had been sometimes, how isolating it felt to see the world differently than others. I threw myself into helping Thomas navigate his social world. I volunteered for every school event, joined the PTA, organized playdates, and study groups. I researched social skills techniques and practiced with him at home. I became his advocate, his coach, his safe harbor. "You don't have to do all this," David said one night after I'd spent hours making cupcakes for Thomas's science club bake sale. "Yes, I do," I replied. "He needs this." What I didn't say was that I needed it too. That helping Thomas gave me purpose, made me feel like I was using my creative problem-solving skills for something important. That his successes felt like my own. The middle school years were rough. Thomas's body changed faster than his emotional maturity, leaving him awkward and self-conscious. There were tears, slammed doors, shouting matches that left us both exhausted. David retreated further into his work, coming home later and traveling more frequently. The arguments between us grew more bitter, usually ending with one of us sleeping in the guest room. "You're too soft on him," David would say. "And you're hardly ever here," I'd retort. Through it all, I never wavered in my commitment to Thomas. When he developed an interest in computers, I scrimped and saved from my teaching salary to buy him programming books and equipment. When he struggled with a particularly difficult math concept, I hired a tutor, cutting back on groceries to afford it. When he joined the robotics team in high school, I drove him to meetings, competitions, workshops, sometimes crossing 3 towns in a single afternoon. My own health began to suffer. Chronic migraines. Back pain from years of carrying children's art supplies and science fair projects. Insomnia that left me staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., worrying about Thomas's college applications. "You need to take care of yourself," my doctor advised during a checkup. "I will," I promised. When things settle down. Things never settled down. Thomas's senior year was a whirlwind of applications, essays, campus visits. His grades and extracurriculars made him a strong candidate for top engineering programs, and when the thick acceptance packet from MIT arrived, we all cried with joy. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," Thomas said, hugging me tightly. Those words sustained me through the difficult months that followed. David and I had postponed addressing our marital problems for years, using Thomas as a buffer. With him leaving for college, we were forced to confront the strangers we'd become to each other. "I think we should try counseling," I suggested one night. David sighed, looking older than his 53 years. "I'm not sure there's enough left to salvage, Ellie." He moved out 3 months after Thomas left for college. The divorce was finalized the following year, amicable but heartbreaking nonetheless. 24 years of marriage dissolved into asset divisions and custody agreements for holidays. Thomas was angry at first, then resigned. He came home less frequently, spending breaks with friends or at internships. I threw myself into my teaching, expanding my classes, organizing community art shows. I dated occasionally, nothing serious. I joined a hiking group, took a pottery class, volunteered at an animal shelter. I was building a new life, one small piece at a time. Thomas thrived at MIT. His phone calls became less frequent but were filled with exciting updates, research opportunities, networking events, new friends. I listened hungrily, storing away each detail. After graduation, he landed a prestigious job at a tech firm in Seattle. I helped him move across the country, driving the U-Haul while he followed in his car. We spent 3 days setting up his apartment, shopping for furniture, hanging curtains. On my last night there, we sat on his new couch eating takeout Chinese food. "I'm so proud of you," I told him, meaning it with every fiber of my being. "Thanks," he said, then hesitated. "But I kind of did this on my own, you know? College, the job, that was all me." "Of course it was," I agreed quickly. "You've always been so smart and determined." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. Something subtle had shifted, but I pushed the uneasiness away. He was establishing his independence. That was normal. Healthy, even. Over the next few years, our relationship continued to evolve. Thomas was promoted twice, bought a condo, started dating a software engineer named Alicia. I flew out for his 30th birthday, meeting his friends and colleagues at a trendy restaurant downtown. "Your son is absolutely brilliant," one of his coworkers told me. The youngest team lead in company history. I beamed with pride, watching Thomas across the room, confident and successful. This was what all those sacrifices had been for. This moment. Later that weekend, we were having brunch when Thomas mentioned that David had reconnected with him. "Dad's thinking of starting his own investment firm," he said casually. "He's been asking my advice on the digital infrastructure." "That's wonderful," I said, ignoring the pang in my chest. David hadn't mentioned this during our brief, practical phone calls about insurance papers and tax documents. "Yeah, he's really reinvented himself since the divorce. New career direction, got in shape, even dating someone new." "Good for him," I managed. Thomas studied me over his coffee cup. "What about you, Mom? Any new projects?" "My students' exhibition is next month," I offered. "And I've joined a book club." He nodded, but I could see the slight downturn of his mouth. Disappointment? Pity? I couldn't quite tell. "You know," he said after a moment, "there are some great online courses you could take. It's never too late to start a new career." "I like teaching," I said, suddenly defensive. "Sure, but don't you want more? Something challenging?" Before I could respond, his phone rang, Alicia calling about viewing an apartment they were considering moving into together. The conversation shifted, the moment passed, but his words lingered. 6 months later, Thomas and Alicia got engaged. I threw myself into wedding planning, grateful for the distraction. My small house filled with sample invitations, fabric swatches, and bridal magazines. I spent hours researching venues, florists, photographers, wanting everything to be perfect for them. One evening, Thomas called to discuss the guest list. "Mom, you don't need to do all this," he said, sounding exasperated. "We can hire a wedding planner." "I don't mind," I insisted. "I want to help. But it's taking over your life. Every time we talk, it's all about the wedding. I just want it to be special for you and Alicia." He sighed. "What we want is for you to enjoy being the mother of the groom, not exhaust yourself with details." I felt stung but agreed to step back. The wedding was beautiful, of course. Thomas and Alicia glowed with happiness. David brought his girlfriend, a stylish architect 15 years his junior. I wore a blue dress that had taken me weeks to find and smiled until my cheeks hurt. At the reception, I danced with Thomas, trying not to cry. "I'm so happy for you," I told him. "Thanks, Mom." He looked down at me, expression softening. "Are you happy?" "In general, I mean." "Of course," I said automatically. "Why wouldn't I be?" He shrugged. "You just seem stuck. Like you're still living for me instead of yourself." Before I could respond, the song ended, and Alicia appeared to claim him for another dance. I retreated to my table, his words echoing in my head. After the wedding, Thomas and Alicia bought a house in Seattle's suburbs. I visited for Thanksgiving, helping them host their first holiday as a married couple. The house was beautiful, modern, spacious, with a view of the mountains from the kitchen window. On Friday morning, Thomas found me sitting on their deck with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. "Early riser like always," he said, joining me with his own mug. "Old habits," I replied with a smile. We sat in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke again. "Alicia and I have been talking about starting a family." My heart leapt. "That's wonderful. You'll be amazing parents." "We think so," he agreed. "But it got me thinking about how we want to do things differently." "Different from what?" "From how I was raised." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Alicia plans to keep working after the baby. We'll share childcare responsibilities equally." "That sounds sensible," I said cautiously, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest. "The thing is, Mom," he continued, "I don't want either of us to give up our identities for our children. I saw what happened with you, how you just became Thomas's mom and nothing else." The tightness increased. "I was other things. I taught. I volunteered. But you gave up your real passion. Your art." He turned to face me directly. "You had such talent, and you just abandoned it." "I made a choice," I said quietly. "A choice I don't regret." "But look at where you are now," he pressed. "Dad has his new business, I have my career, even Alicia is up for a director position. And you've just been existing. Taking care of everyone else." The words hit like physical blows. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? What have you accomplished for yourself, Mom? What goals have you achieved? What dreams have you fulfilled?" "I raised you," I said, my voice breaking. "I helped you become who you are." Thomas shook his head, frustration evident in his expression. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. You haven't accomplished anything in your life. You've just been sitting at home." Silence fell between us, heavy and cold as stone. He must have seen something in my face because his expression immediately softened. "I didn't mean it like that," he backpedaled. "I just want you to have more in your life." But the damage was done. The words hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. "I should start packing," I said finally, standing up. "My flight's at 4. Mom." "It's fine, Thomas." "Really?" But it wasn't fine. Not then, not on the silent drive to the airport, not during the long flight home. Not as I entered my empty house, put down my suitcase, and finally allowed myself to cry. "You haven't accomplished anything in your life." The words played on repeat in my head for days afterward. I moved through my routine, teaching classes, buying groceries, paying bills, but felt disconnected from it all, viewing my life through Thomas's eyes. What had I accomplished? I hadn't become the artist I dreamed of being. I hadn't traveled extensively or written a book or started a business. My marriage had failed. My house was modest. My savings account barely existed after helping with Thomas's education and the wedding. One afternoon, about a week after returning from Seattle, I found myself in the attic, pulling down boxes I hadn't opened in years. Art supplies, sketchbooks, portfolios of work from my school days. Dust covered everything, making me sneeze as I carried them down to the living room. I opened the first portfolio with trembling hands. Inside were drawings, paintings, photographs of installations, the work of a younger woman with ambition and vision. Some of it was embarrassingly amateur, but other pieces still resonated. I could see what my professors had seen: potential. At the bottom of the box was a leather-bound journal. My throat tightened as I recognized it, my dream journal from art school, where I'd outlined my 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plans. Gallery showings. Museum exhibitions. A studio of my own. Teaching at the university level. None of it had happened. I closed the journal and put my face in my hands. Was Thomas right? Had I accomplished nothing? Had all those midnight feedings, all those homework sessions, all those hours driving to robotics competitions and doctor appointments, had they amounted to nothing in the end? For days, I wandered my house like a ghost, looking at the life I'd built with new, critical eyes. The walls decorated with Thomas's achievements, diplomas, awards, photographs. The bookshelf filled with parenting books rather than art theory. The spare room that had never quite become the studio David had promised all those years ago. I called in sick to my classes. I didn't answer the phone. I barely ate. I was grieving, I realized, grieving for the Eleanor who might have been. On the 4th day, my doorbell rang. It was Sarah, a colleague from the community center, holding a casserole. "You missed staff meeting," she said by way of explanation. "We were worried." I let her in, embarrassed by my unwashed hair and the state of my house. "I'm fine," I insisted. "Just a bit under the weather." Sarah didn't look convinced. As we sat at my kitchen table, she noticed the art portfolios still spread across the living room floor. "I didn't know you were an installation artist," she said, picking up a photograph. "A lifetime ago," I replied. "These are remarkable, Eleanor." So visceral. Something in her sincere appreciation cracked open the vault of emotions I'd been suppressing. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything: the dreams deferred, the sacrifices made, Thomas's cutting words. "What hurts most," I confessed, "is that he might be right. What do I have to show for my life?" Sarah looked at me for a long moment. "Come with me," she said finally. She drove me to the community center, closed that day for maintenance. Using her key, she led me down the hallway to the student gallery where an exhibition was being set up. "Look," she said simply. The walls were covered with artwork, paintings, drawings, collages. In the center of the room stood several sculptures. I recognized the work of my students, past and present. "I don't understand." "This is our alumni show," Sarah explained. "Every piece here was created by someone you taught. Look at the statements." I moved closer to read the placards beside each work. Again and again, I saw my name mentioned. Ms. Mitchell taught me to see color in shadows. Eleanor showed me that mistakes can become the most interesting part of a piece. Without my time in Eleanor Mitchell's class, I would never have found the courage to pursue art school. My vision blurred with tears. "You've touched hundreds of lives, Eleanor," Sarah said gently. "You've nurtured creativity in people who might never have found it otherwise. How is that not an accomplishment?" I stayed in that gallery for hours after Sarah left, reading every statement, examining every piece. I remembered the students, the shy teenager who blossomed when given a paintbrush, the retired accountant who discovered a passion for sculpture, the young mother who brought her baby to class and now had work in a downtown gallery. Walking home in the fading light, I felt something shift inside me, not healing, exactly, but a realignment. Thomas's words still hurt, but they no longer defined me. That night, I cleared off my dining table and took out a sketch pad for the first time in years. My hand felt stiff, unpracticed, but as I began to draw, muscle memory took over. I worked until dawn, creating rough, emotional pieces that would never hang in a gallery but felt more authentic than anything I'd made in my youth. Over the following weeks, I established a new routine. Teaching by day, creating by night. I transformed the spare room into a proper studio with my modest savings. I joined an artists' collective, started showing up at local exhibitions. I reconnected with old classmates through social media. Thomas called several times, but I let the calls go to voicemail, not yet ready to speak with him. His messages grew increasingly concerned, then apologetic. "Mom, I'm sorry about what I said. Please call me back." 3 months after Thanksgiving, I finally did. "I thought you were ignoring me," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I needed some time," I replied honestly. "I was out of line," he continued. "What I said was cruel and untrue." "It was cruel," I agreed, "but not entirely untrue. I did give up certain dreams when I had you. That's a fact. But let me finish, Thomas. I made choices I would make again in a heartbeat. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of myself. That's not your fault. It's not even your father's fault. It's just what happened. I never wanted you to sacrifice everything for me," he said quietly. "I know that now. And I'm finding my way back to certain parts of myself. But I need you to understand something important. Motherhood wasn't a consolation prize for me. It wasn't what I settled for when art didn't work out. It was its own kind of creation, messy and imperfect and absolutely worthwhile." Silence stretched between us, but it felt different than the silence after his hurtful words, lighter somehow, with possibility. "Alicia's pregnant," he said finally. "We just found out last week." Joy rushed through me. "That's wonderful news. We want you to be involved. Not just as a grandmother but as yourself, the artist, the teacher, the whole person." "I'd like that," I said, smiling through tears. We talked for another hour, really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. About his fears of parenthood, about my new art projects, about finding balance in a world that often demands choice. When we hung up, I returned to my studio and the canvas I'd been working on, a layered, textured piece exploring the concept of time and transformation. It wasn't the work I would have created at 24, but it had a depth and understanding that only comes with living a full life, with its disappointments and joys. Looking at it, I thought about the young woman I'd been, with her dreams of New York galleries. I thought about the mother I became, driving to robotics competitions and staying up late helping with college essays. I thought about the woman I was becoming now, older, wiser, with paint under her fingernails again. None of these versions of Eleanor Mitchell had failed. They had simply transformed, one into the other, carrying forward what mattered most. I added another layer to the canvas, my hand steady and sure. Outside, the sun was rising, painting the sky in colors I would have once been too busy to notice. I had accomplished enough. I had lived enough. And I wasn't finished yet. The canvas before me was proof of that, unfinished, imperfect, but undeniably, authentically mine.